Philip Scalero believes the library stand is one of the last surviving islands of community safety and creative opportunity. For more than 7 years, he has worked closely with Opportunity Youth in Maryland and has listened closely to their frustrations and their dreams. Now, as a respected expert in youth engagement with nationally recognized training and collaboration experience, he works with youth to channel their frustrations into positive change as they identify and strive toward their own goals. In his position with Potomac Case Management Services, Philip has been tasked with developing and managing client-led programs for some of the most vulnerable populations in his community. He began Family Strong, a support group for teenagers of incarcerated parents, providing needed services for families and caregivers. He is in the process of launching Struggle Wrap, targeting underemployed youth ages 16 to 24. In addition to his professional work, Philip creates original art and restores historical works with traditional bookbinding skills he learned in an apprenticeship in Canada. Philip has taught the craft in several community classes as well as one hosted by his local free library. He and his artsy homesteading family view the library as a bottomless source of inspiration and exposure as well as a community sanctuary. Philip lives and works in Washington County, Maryland, and we welcome here today.
Thanks. I'm not good at standing, partly because it feels more like a conversation with a lot of people. Okay. This is a big honor. This is among the sexiest things I can imagine doing. And genuinely, among my dream jobs with working at a national park and professional skateboarding, working at a library, especially with young adults, is among those things. So seriously, thank you. It's a big deal for me. I want to give you guys a few disclaimers. I start most conversations with disclaimers. Okay, with my wife starts with disclaimers. So I should tell you. Oh, do I need this thing? Yeah. How do you guys feel with this? They can hear the table. Okay. Okay, maybe not. Maybe there might. Yep. Okay, sorry. Yeah, I think messages. All right, it's harder to tell me when it's there. Really? Okay, that's what you meant. Like, good. Okay. If I bump it, it's gonna get really bad, guys. Okay, so the first thing is, yeah, I'm gonna try to make room for questions at the end. Like most conversations, full-on hour-long monologue is not as fun. Okay, and I'll do better with questions, even if one of you would like to, be a heckler or something like that. Okay. So also, kind of true to what I'm trying to talk to you guys about today, I just want to be honest about who I'm not. I'm not a librarian, like I said, just a dreamer of a future in libraries. But I am a patron, and I'm also not an educator, but I don't want to presume to be in your space, okay? When I talk about kind of like being in my space, in the places where you guys work and do the stuff you guys do. And also, I have not been able to break the habit of using teen and kid interchangeably. And when I say that, this is like a definition. I'm talking about like 13 to like 25, okay? And I use kid as a term of endearment, and it's been like one of the only socially appropriate things I can use with boundaries with youth I work with, is saying, hey kid, okay? So with that, I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about my story. There's a reason libraries are so important to me, and there's a reason I feel a little bit more connected than average with what we have previously called disconnected youth, because I think I was one. And I think that youth has an experience in this in-between stage for adulting is in its nature disconnecting. During the worst moments in my life, and without going into too much detail, I could say being on the verge of homelessness, recovering from traumatic incidents, libraries became very safe places for me. And even in my bookbinding apprenticeship, hiding in books and places where people wanted to learn became safe things for me. So that's kind of the context with which I'm talking. And, you know, beyond that, my life kind of evolved into professional work with teens and youth in the same place in life. And I'll talk a little bit more about my time working with juvenile drug courts in Maryland. But I could say most people think that teens are pretty tricky. Okay, that this is a difficult age group to wrap our head around, and I think it's like largely stereotyped to just being hard, right, for everybody involved. Let's see, no. This one maybe. Yeah. Okay. So this is a picture of a misunderstood and I'm going to assume and say insecure kid laying on the dirty floor of a bus. I know that for sure because it's me when I was 17, only with much more hair and maybe slightly better fashion sense. Okay, and it is tricky. It is hard to look back at ourselves during this age and to have any kind of like relevant empathy when we find ourselves distanced from it as our life experience develops and progresses. And what I'd encourage you guys to do, like while I'm talking and surely like afterwards, is to get better at that exercise and to think of it as an exercise of humility, of putting yourself back in the vulnerable skin of that stage of your life, of being in between, of not finding comfort. And I tried to do that, but I tried to do that without over-projecting on the people who aren't me and the people who are living at a different time. I was a youth. You know, a lot of things have changed, and there's a lot of, I guess, space between our own youth experience and the youth that we are experiencing now. And I think there are some kind of stereotypes and interesting narratives in regards to that. This is a paraphrase from a quote that I thought was funny, not ha-ha funny. And I can't read it very well, so I'm gonna lie and stand up. So it says, I wish that the ages between 16 and 23 didn't exist, or that young men would spend them asleep. Otherwise, there is nothing between those ages but getting girls pregnant, acting dishonestly towards their elders, stealing, fighting, etc. Does anybody know where that's from? From the Winter Scale, from 1623. And this is how it was originally said, first paraphrase. I would there no age between 10 and 23, or that youth would sleep out the rest, for there is nothing in the between but getting wenches with child. I like that phrase. Wronging the gentry, stealing, fighting, a gentleman named William Shakespeare. And I think this is kind of telling. One, we've thought this for a long time, and I think that we have felt the distance between us and our respective youths for a long time. And it's interesting what hasn't changed. It's interesting how typical the slander feels to me, and how familiar it feels to me, having been a youth between 10 and 23. As he says, he got really close to actual Mountain Elf stage. You guys will probably talk about that later. I would say within this and within most storylines I interact with, the distance between us and youth seems to be typified by resentment. You know, when I think of this kind of like resentful relationship beginning and this kind of like larger, like a macro landscape, I think of people talking about the 60s and things, and kind of like sex, drugs, and rock and roll being introduced as kind of like an accessible thing. And for me, I actually think of a little bit different era, like just before that. And yeah, that's a cigarette, and it does not. I still think he looks cool, maybe cooler. So this is, if you guys thought this is John Travolta, okay, from Greece. There's a break after this. I want you to go to the nonfiction section. Okay, I want you to find a book on James Dean. Okay. Now, James Dean died at age 24. Okay, so he was at the age of youth, and his brain was just finally getting there. Okay, and he died literally on his way to a race car race. And again, I'm so glad I don't have to cover the brain stuff because there's a lot I could say, but I think there's people today that are going to say it better. He says, dream as if you'll live forever. Live as if you'll die today. Eventually that's true. And, you know, what's interesting is today, his birthday was in February, today, he's going to be an 87-year-old man, okay, my grandparents' age. And if he were here, even a rebel without a cause would tell you that some things have changed. Like, who got the rebel without a cause? Just let me get it, okay. All right, so as an 87-year-old man, even being the quintessential icon of a bad boy and kind of the misunderstood youth, I think he would agree that things have changed, and I do think for a number of reasons, the distance seems greater than ever before. I do think that there are certain things moving faster than us, around us. The obvious things, right, like technology, social media. But I think that the slower parts of our existence, sitting down, developing meaningful relationships, and the stuff that's really important for finding out who we are is harder to get to and maybe fading in some ways. And if you think of understanding youth in terms of somebody who's deciding who they are, right? And at a certain point, interacting with youth, I stopped being frustrated with a lot of things I couldn't control. It still, I think, reserved that frustration for certain things I can't control. But a lot of things, I was able to kind of forego that, partly because at a certain point I realized there's a really beautiful, awkward-looking dance taking place in these other people's lives. They're at a very different end of the power dynamic table. Okay, no matter how intimidating they seem, no matter how loud and aggressive and socially offensive they seem, they are not in control. They are very aware of that. In fact, that's probably where a lot of those behaviors come from. And they're in one of the first stages of real heroic acts in their lives. They've got to find out to get from there to here. And I think that's harder than ever. And I'm not sure where we are now is going to be where they saw it when they started. I do think that there are still a lot of ways to bridge that gap. But I think that breaking it down and focusing on the gap itself is maybe not the way. And I'm going to switch gears a little bit here. I'm going to talk about some of the moments when I started to feel this way. So like I said earlier, I worked for years in a juvenile drug court. So there's like usually between 480 and 500 of those in the country at a time. And counties across the country will have these kind of problem-solving courts to do more than detain adolescents with some kind of drug problem, right? Addiction is varying in opinions with adolescents, especially the typical substances they engage in. But suffice to say, I worked with kids who got in trouble, usually not because of drugs, but when they got in trouble and all the adults started to look closer at their lives, people realized that drugs seem to be a big part of the problem. Um, what I can tell you is I slowly realized it wasn't usually the big problem. Um, I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say it was never the actual problem. And as I tried to figure out what that actual problem was, I worked with a group of other professionals, a few lawyers. I worked with um, several judges throughout the course of time there. I worked with a psychiatrist. I worked with a few different addiction counselors, and county representatives for schools and things. And I would hear these people talk. And when I started this, I was in my mid-20s, and what I can tell you is I definitely felt like I was one of the kids in the room. Like I had some kind of weird cloaking device where I had snuck into this grown-up conversation and overheard these people talking about these other kids that I knew. It was weird, it was surreal, and I remember being really uncomfortable, not just because I felt like I related more maybe to the people I was serving, but I think also um, something felt oversimplistic to the degree of being inaccurate when I heard other professionals and adults talking about this population. And truly, they're a different specific population. And I remember people saying things like, I'm trying to get a read on her, I'm trying to figure him out. He had potential, or even worse in some ways to me, he has potential. Part of the reason the potential one used to hurt is because, to me, potential seems like something that's not here yet. It feels like we're talking about something that may or may not be, or something we're working towards if we can achieve a certain status or arrive at a certain place. And I didn't feel like the youth I was with were missing. I just thought not a lot of people were slowing down or paying close enough attention or listening enough to find out what was really going on. And they just looked broken through their lens. So there was a day that this kind of like struck me, especially where I lived in town. I intentionally lived in town for the first 3 years that I was doing this. I think I had a bit of a hero complex, and I fancied myself a man of the people, and I thought, I'm going to familiarize myself with the suffering of this community, and to a very small degree, I'd say that happened. And I had many an experience in my downtown apartment. And one of those experiences led to my wife's engagement ring being stolen through a bathroom window. It's a long story, but a man had been using heroin IV in our apartment laundry room, which was right next to our bathroom. So he would go in there for a safe place to use, and that was like a really surprising thing when you had to clean your underwear. And we would crack that window often because the for ventilation in our bathroom. So anyways, one day I think that there was a diamond ring sitting there as this guy was going in and out. That's my fault as much as it is his. Okay, and I found out about this and decided, after work I was going to go file an actual report, because if I had any hope of finding this diamond ring in like a pawn shop or something, I would have to have like a paper trail with an actual report, like showing that our report was stolen 2 weeks ago, and I could just find a diamond ring and say it was mine. And I went to the police department, and the hours I got off were apparently much after most of them got off. And I waited. And I waited outside this police department downtown in my city, which is Hagerstown. And as I was waiting there, I saw like a crowd of people coming on foot, and it was only like 4 or 5 people, and they seemed upset. And then I realized I recognized one of the kids in the group. There was an adult, some teens. I recognized some things that told me 2 of them were gang members. And I didn't really mind. That was kind of like my jam at the time. So I was just interested in that. I recognized one of them. So this girl comes up, and she's with a family friend, and some people are crying, and everyone seems angry. And they're like, well, where are the police? And I said, well, I think apparently they have a heck of an evening schedule. And then I wait longer, and I don't know what's going on. I'm trying to mind my own business. And I'm not really working in my mind, okay? I don't really get off and kind of like work in relation to the problems of the people I serve. And I saw another group of people coming, a smaller group, and this time it was a young man I really recognized. I spent a lot of time with this kid. And I knew a lot of things about how hard his life was, but this day kind of opened things up for me a little bit more. I was finally led inside by the police, and now what's around, let me do the math here in my head, I don't know, 7 or 8 people pile into this little police station lobby, and we've got one officer, and she's got a notepad, right, and we're going to go in line, and I'm thinking, whatever happens to this diamond ring is probably not as important at this point or as urgent as what these people are crying about. And the first girl walks up, and the people she's with explain that every time her mom's drunk, she's mean, and this time she wouldn't stop, and she started hitting her with a hanger. And family members are grabbing the girl, which is a whole other figure, and pulling up her sleeves and showing marks. There's one of her peers in the room, in the same drug program as her. And I'm her assigned case manager. I spend hours a week with her. She knows all this. She's kind of awkwardly explaining this to her family and friends. And the gang member she's with is a family member. He's making threats, and it's pretty tense. And then they move on to the boy. He's with his adult sister, and he's got definitely some redness on his face and some marks on his one side. His hair looks matted, like he's been in a tussle. And he was in what he described as a fist fight with his stepfather, but his stepfather is about, I'm going to say, 2.5 times my size. And this young man, I'm probably got 40 pounds on him. He also couldn't do one. Now, this was not a fight. He was being abused by an adult who didn't love him, and you could tell in court. And this girl was being abused, and these are the same kids. People would shake their head because they showed up late for urinalysis. These are the same kids. People got upset because the girl went missing for a few days and came back pregnant. And I started to realize that it was an impossible task for me to presume to know and understand the experiences of these very vulnerable people who are marginalized, resented, stereotyped, and just waiting to survive this period of their life, which they think is over at 18. They almost don't have the heart to tell that they've got 6 more years. And I remember thinking, maybe I've got a better chance of helping if somehow I can listen differently and get better at remembering that I don't know. We had an exercise. This is scrolling. This is a 6-year-old crumpled piece of paper from the court order of my cat. So there's an exercise called I Believe. You guys should do this. Okay, I wish that was on your little to the speaker worksheet. But there's basically a group discussion where everybody's kind of said, think of your manifesto. Why are you here? Why do you work for this group? And write down your own words that everybody's going to share. And I did this with this group of professionals and slowly tried to help them understand that they didn't know. At this point, I was already thinking that way a little bit. And I listened to their responses, and I thought, oh man, I screwed this up. I think this a lot when I do group exercises. I think oh man, I took it wrong, or I took things really, really serious for a minute and hit everybody sideways. And people are saying, I believe that as a state's attorney, it's my job to protect the county and prosecute as much as I can. And public defenders are saying, I'm going to do whatever the kid says no matter what. And people are talking about accurate assessments and things. And I thought, oh man, I'm so inexperienced and not technical. And here's the mindset I said. I believe that the youth I work with are whole people. And you can tell it looks like a 6-year-old wrote this with their candidate, relatives. And I respect them too much to assume I can figure them out. I believe that if I can help the wholeness, I didn't know if that was a word of quotations with comment from the person who said it. I believe that if I can help the wholeness of who they are, where they're from, be understood by myself and our team, then my role is fulfilled in helping them where they need it most, and painting a more accurate picture of their lives for our team to make critical decisions that affect their whole lives. And I mean that with longevity also, because some of the youth we work with, the young man I mentioned in the story, I saw in jail last week while I was interviewing adults for another program that I do with adults with drug problems. And I smiled and I was able to genuinely say, I'm so happy to see you. Not so much in cuffs and orange, but very happy. Partly because it needs the light. And I remember feeling like my job has shifted into one of being an interpreter. I'll let you in on some embarrassing credentials I have. I don't have a psychiatry degree or background. Not a social worker. My background's in language and culture studies. I work with tribal groups. And I just bombed hard after school. Okay, part of my story, leading library afterwards. And I read. And I felt much more at home when I realized that what I was really doing was language and culture acquisition for the sake of interpreting. And that what I was doing is trying to become a safe outlet for youth, and protecting them from myself became one of my biggest duties when I was listening to them and trying to develop truly competent responses to their needs as they describe them to me in other words. I do think, just like they were for me, that libraries do this. This is my story, okay? So I feel some ownership over this. But do you recognize this place? Mm-hmm. So this is the Washington County Free Library. And Hagerstown is really sexy in its lighting. Not usually this lighting. And I love it. And in this window, I know that my daughter's favorite comic books reside. Okay? And I know way back in that corner where those crazy X's are, both my girls sang story time with a guy named Dave, and that's a crazy laugh of it. And I know I printed things there when I didn't own a printer, and I couldn't afford Wi-Fi or my own wireless. And this is where I went to teach bookbinding skills eventually. This is where I went to kind of hide for a lot of my life. And I think that, and I've interacted with the youth here, and I bring youth here, and I think that there's a unique opportunity as one of the last surviving true community centers that libraries present now. So they're not a place with books, and indeed there are libraries now without books. And I know it's where people go to do their taxes and understand the housing requirements for homelessness shelters. And I know, and we now have a social worker that sits in meetings with me at our library. And there's an opportunity to be a not scary place in a progressively more scary world. And for you teens/kids especially, um, a scary existence and stage of life. And I thought this looked a lot like a postcard for that font. Kept it there to be cute. So it says, a safe place to land. Ironically, you wouldn't find that if you search articles on Hagerstown. You wouldn't find anything describing it as a safe place to land. You'd hear things about the opioid problems, the homicide rate rivaling that of Baltimore per capita. You'd learn about a lot of the things we're proud of are progressive responses to crime and addiction. But guess what? Only places that have a lot of crime and addiction have those kind of solutions. And I think that especially in places like that, and libraries are in rural areas too, and but still in central areas, right? Near schools, downtown. And I guess if we could turn this into a conversation more so, that's a little more two ways. I do want to talk about how these spaces become that. So that's about it. I'm really bad at ethics. Okay, so for real, I hope that you guys think of questions, even scenarios. I know, some of the things Anna's doing with the youth strike me as different because even when I was a kid and I thought of library activities or book clubs, it seems like a certain type of kid that goes to that, and maybe ones with better reading comprehension than me. And it doesn't seem to be that way at my library. And there seems to be a wide range of, what I would call stability, and that people are coming from different paths. I avoided brain development because I really do believe that there's more qualified people in the room. But I can't help but think about it in my day-to-day. If I had to give you guys something else besides get better at listening and stop fixing things, I would say pay attention, pay close attention to that and what they can and can't do, and don't just pay attention to what the brain's not capable of before the prefrontal cortex is connected all the way, but also what kind of special places that someone at in their development. I think that people spend a lot of time trying to answer the questions that they think youth is plagued with. And I think that libraries can present an opportunity to listen to the questions they may actually have. And if you can keep kind of an open posture that doesn't presume that you're required to react or respond, I think those questions will flow. And I can't think of a better place to find answers. So, yeah, for real this time. I thought if I said that, I was going to say, I thought that if I said that, I was going to have room for questions, that there would actually be questions.
I'm sure there are questions. And I can be the mic runner and bring this to you. You don't have to move very far. You can just think and ask. And this is that perfect opportunity for you all to share something, an experience that you've had, relationship that you've developed, any kind of a partnership that you've been able to forge with either another staff member or a community partner, or anything just that lends itself to just this dialogue that maybe you've been able to develop, or a relationship that you've been able to develop, or a way to create this safe space? Because we hear so much from the challenges that our youth have today in those hours when they are in that formal learning environment, and what they may have started from at the beginning of the day in their home environment, and then gone straight into that 8 hours or whatever of school. I mean, they're done. I mean, when they hit that 3 o'clock, who knows what has happened in all those hours of emotional and academics and peer pressures and everything that's already, and then they may walk into your door, and there they are, and that's what you begin with. And Laura's got the perspective of from in the school of what the school librarians, they also, I think, we know that they're the kids that they come into the school library because that's their place that they can take a few minutes to breathe. Laura.
I was just thinking, I was just thinking what you said about not trying to fix them. When I was in a middle school, we had a kid who had been held back multiple times, so he was very large compared to other middle schoolers, and had a history, and there were some teachers that refused to have him in their class. And I was in the library, and one of the APs came in and said, I need a place to hold him. He can't be in this class, and we can't just can he come into the library? And I said, of course, I don't have a class. So he came in and flopped down into the chair, and I was like, can I get you anything? I'm not talking to you. I said, okay. So I was shelving, and I just sort of kept an eye out of the corner of my eye just to make sure he didn't leave. And I was shelving, and I started humming to myself. And he came over, he was a very large kid, and he came up behind me, and I'm not going to hurt you. I said, I didn't think you were going to hurt me. You startled me because you just walked so quietly up behind me. What are you doing? And I said, I'm putting the books in and pulling them forward so that kids can find them. Why do you do that? And so I just started talking to him like he was a kid. And then I said, do you want to do it? Oh, I don't know. And I said, just do this. I said, you do that end, I'll do this end. And we'll work towards the middle. And just all of a sudden, the AP came in, and he was like, what are you doing? And I said, oh, he's helping me with the books. And I'm not doing anything. And I said, he's fine, he's helping me with the books. And I became the place that he wanted to come. When he had an issue, whatever issue in school, he would say to the people, his handlers, he would say, I want to go to the library. And he could come to the library. If I had a class, I said, do you want to go sit in my office? You can close the door and be quiet and alone. And sometimes he would. And then, I know, too much. I used up my time. But sometimes I would come in and he would be doodling on my desk calendar. And I still have those pages. But it was just one of those things where don't have preconceived notions about how these kids are. Just treat them like kids.
Can I say something?
Sure.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you for being a holding cell. I think that kind of a overlooked, disadvantaging thing while you're adulting is having a really big body and looking like an adult. And I started shaving when I was 14 years old. And I learned from watching a Frank Sinatra movie. And something I remember and something I notice a lot, especially in court settings when somebody's in trouble, or in school settings when someone's in trouble, is, if I took off 10 years, this is a 4-year-old or a 6-year-old, and I showed you pictures of, my kids those ages, everyone would make gushy noises, right? Because you'd immediately feel this draw to kind of like coddle and protect this precious person. You wouldn't question their validity in the world or their potential. When they get big, we start to wonder, we start to feel threatened. Then suddenly, before we know it, we're thinking about ourselves instead of the growing little person in front of us that just outpaced us in size recently.
Anyone else?
Hello. So my name's Laura Lee. I work with Anne Arundel County at the Glen Burnie Library. And I just kind of wanted to throw it out there in case it might help anyone else. But I've been there almost like 2.5 years now. And last year I put out an anonymous journal out in the teen space. And it took them a while to get used to it and start writing in it. But they filled it up as soon as they did, and I have another one now this year. Every school year I'll put a new one out, is my thought process. But some of the stuff that you read, it's really dark and really sad, but then at the end there always some comment about, thank you for having this out here. It gives me a space to express myself, even if they're not putting, a name to it or anything, which is the whole point, is like you can just share whatever's bothering you. And usually people will respond, and it's always been really positive. There's never been any negative, like, oh, who cares, and all of that. It's always like, well, we're here for you. You're not alone. Like, we love you, and somebody loves you. And if I always try and go through it, and if I see stuff, like, I'll respond. Like, they don't know it's me, but I'll put in like resources for them. So like if they say they're being abused, like I'll give them on the library email too, like if you really need somebody. But I also give them access to like our county resources for that kind of stuff, or like suicide prevention, or like help with, like drug addiction and all of that. But if that's something that could work in your space, I would recommend it, because it's just been a really positive like outlet for them, and a way for them to also like encourage and communicate with each other.
Thank you. Josephine and then Dylan.
My name is Josephine, and I'm at the Oxon Hill Library, and we have a teen advisory board, and there was a young man that used to come to the meetings, and he was quite disruptive, and, it's like, if you want to continue to come, you've got to respect other people. And we would have snacks out, and, he would just take all these snacks, and I was like, oh my God. And I was like, okay, it's supposed to be one per person. We have to, there might be other people that want a snack or whatever. And I was talking to my daughter about it one day, and she's a little older than they are, and she said, Mom, but you don't know, that may be the only food he gets. So, let him take as many snacks as he wants. And so I, started talking to him, and he told me he was in this school because he didn't know how to behave. He was in a different kind of school. And I was like, well, why don't you know how to behave? He says, I don't know. So he kept talking to me, and then after a while they would say, your son is here. That's what the people in the library would say, well, your son is here. And I was like, started talking to him, and he was so excited that his grades started getting better. And so he says, I'm on the honor roll. And I was like, you're right, sure you are. I want to see that report card. And he brought me this report card, and he had all A's and B's, and he was just so excited about it. And then I was watching the Wednesday's Child program on Channel 4, and he was on that. And I started thinking, oh my God, you just don't know what kids are going through. Here he was about to age out of the program, waiting to be adopted. So we don't know who's coming in our doors.
Thank you. And Dylan.
So I just have a question for you. My name is Dylan from the Caroline County Public Library. We work in the Denton branch. And we have a pretty big teen and makerspace area. And it's kind of become a place for a lot of kids to come after school. They'll run from the bus and hang out there pretty much all day. And then in the summers, we see a lot of kids getting there when we open and staying until we close every day. And it can be a little disruptive, because you have a lot of kids in a small space. We're not a very big library branch. But it's really great to see that there's, they feel comfortable to be there. They express that it's a safe place for them. They're not outside during the summer. They're not outside during the winter. A lot of times they aren't able to go home because their parents are working, or their parent is working, and they bring their entire family, all their kids, all the siblings, and spend time in the library. So I think it's a really, it's unique, but it's really special for us to be able to have that outlet to interact with their lives. But my question for you is, there's kind of a divide between staff priorities. So there's a certain part of the staff that seems to understand that and really value the opportunity to interact with youth on their terms, and like you said, not try to understand or impose our own particular worldview on them, but just reach them where they are and just try to be more of a friend to them than a person of authority. Because like you said, they just got out of school and from home, so that's not what they need. They don't need another person telling them to be quiet and sit down and all these other things. But then there's a conversation that needs to be had, and it's really difficult to have that conversation with another half of the staff where there's really not that effort to have mindfulness about where youth are, and like you said, projecting yourself back and looking at, the way that you felt when you were their age. So how would you say having that conversation with somebody who really doesn't understand and maybe doesn't want to understand, but just a way to kind of express what you're expressing and express kind of that desire to understand the youth?
So this is a really big part of my job. Similarly, I work with, I'm in charge of what my office calls integrated services. So anything that's mixed, usually components of like mental health, addictions, and some kind of like justice involvement, right? Court stuff, jail stuff, police stuff. And those three groups don't see eye to eye on a lot of things. And I'm constantly kind of like trying to be creative. And I think there's a couple of things here that are kind of standard, and there's a lot of things here you're going to have to customize. Okay, the stuff you have to customize is the individuals who have a differing or opposing view that maybe seems less understanding of youth. They don't all have the same opposing view. And I would remind you, the same way that you're listening closely to a patron or a youth that seems like they need someone to listen closely to loud adults, grumpy adults. And likewise, maybe remind them that skill, that no matter what they say, youth don't go to the library surrounded by adults because they didn't want to be bothered. And also, I would say that, especially if a child is disruptive, it's always with a reason, and a disruption in that sense is an invitation. If somebody yells at me, especially if they're a teen, I know that they're engaging me, which everybody complains they can't do. The truth is that when adults are interacting with youth, it's not on their terms anymore. So they get upset with that. And then they can't see what they are getting, right? You are getting engagement. People will say, well, youth aren't motivated. These really negative narratives. And that's not true, because they're not motivated to do what you want. It's a really different thing, right? And when I would ask youth, hey, I work for you. You don't work for my mom, I don't work for your mom. You work for the court, I don't work for the court. And I could say that because we're like a nonprofit, and I really believed I worked for them. And then I would say, what makes you tick, or like what matters to you, or what's the most important thing that happens to you while I'm working with you. You could tell nobody had asked. That was a new skill for them to kind of figure out. I would ask staff as a whole to try to listen for what's really going on. Teach them to learn that they're going to have to quiet themselves to pay attention to that, and that what's really going on is rarely what we're feeling. So doesn't mean they're going to be some kind of detective and they're going to start like asking 20 questions. It just means they're going to have a little bit more humane approach when somebody's upset or when somebody's distracted or loud. We had youth who wouldn't leave our library too. And one of them got in trouble and panicked. He panicked when he got in trouble because kids have been asked to leave temporarily at times as like a last resort. And not permanently or anything like that. And this kid was panicking because he's not allowed to go home until 9. He's not allowed. And it's true that people's parents are at work, but some people's parents are prostitutes. Some people's parents are dealing drugs. Some people's parents are running dog fights. And home isn't fun to go home to anyway sometimes. But there's serious reasons parents don't want it there also. And I think respecting that we don't know the context of a behavior and that we're in a unique and very privileged position to be subjected to that behavior as an opportunity, that somebody's trusting us to respect them as a person. They don't seem like that. Maybe they're not anticipating that. Surprise them. Surprise them, and maybe you'll get somewhere, and maybe you'll be attributed as a safe place to them, and then maybe they'll let you know them. And that will be a very special thing when it happens, and don't miss it. So, I don't know if that's a good answer, if it's just fluffy.
We've got time for a couple more thoughts or sharings or questions. Katie.
So I actually do a lot of outreach, and one of our programs is an early literacy program in a jail. So people who are incarcerated who have families are eligible for this program. We teach them Every Child Ready to Read. It's great. And it includes a contact visit, which we thought was really wonderful. After doing this program for about 3 years, somebody asked us, what are you doing to support the children afterwards? Going to jail is traumatic. Being separated from their parent again is traumatic. And we were like, oh, we didn't think about that. So now we have a social worker, and we do have some supports for that piece. But what are some of the strategies that we can use to kind of keep the whole person lens in focus as we're planning programs and trying to think about, outside of literacy, how are we supporting people as a whole person?
So there's a typo or something with my bio. I don't run a group for families with incarcerated parents. I run a program that provides family-wide case management for children whose parents are incarcerated. And we do supervised visits. And in most jail settings, and I'm going to talk about the larger topic, but in most jail settings, you're actually only permitted to do video visits now. There's a long story to that. So a visit doesn't look like how it does in the movie where they're in a piece of glass, or maybe they're like in a locked room. They're watching someone on a screen. There's some logistical things to consider there. What I did is, and this is a broader answer, is I started asking adults who had been children with incarcerated parents what that was like. And it's interesting that somebody told you that for the family or the child to visit at the jail is traumatic. It's not traumatic because it's a jail, okay? Or we don't think so. Research doesn't indicate that, okay? Research indicates that that activity is traumatic, okay? Partly because grandma says a lot of nasty things about that on their way there. Partly because children and teens also are very in touch with the rest of their brain. And they can feel when someone else is feeling tense and unsure and worried about seeing somebody they haven't seen and trying to make the most of 50 minutes usually, 5-0. So what we did is we said, it's not the jail, but there's a lot of limitations to the jail. For example, some of our families have 5 children, and those ages range. Some of them are much harder to occupy than others. And something like 98% of incarcerated parents are male. And so dads on the other side of the camera, and he wants to see all his babies, rightfully so. And his babies want to see him, rightfully so. And mama can't wrangle 5 babies in a jail, okay, with correctional officers and a row of other people talking to their loved ones. And some of that stuff you only know from research. Some of the most valuable research is from talking to people who's lived the experience you're trying to penetrate. What we did was made what we call a family room on another facility on jail campus, and brokered a lot of autonomy in that room, so we could have crazy things in there and bright colors, and we had children make artwork, and the dad could literally see his kids in the background, and they'd be drawing, and they'd run up and bring pictures, and mom could say, I love you, instead of him watching her try to wrangle 5 kids. And that's they're not all the same, but something like that. And I think finding ways to get better at listening. When you described kind of a shared journal, the mandated reporter would be cringe. But it's great when it's anonymous. It's just, it would stress me out because I'm so used to being able to act, to intervene. But what I would say also is, just like you responded and you wrote like little kind of like resources down, you gave contact information to help people, you can provide programs based on data like that. And this is data. Okay, a big part of my job now is reporting, and when you're documenting data on the types of programs that I run, you are providing like research data. So as I'm doing surveys or whatever, every interaction we have that we record is data. Okay, so I think that you should ask questions further back than most people do. Not how can we provide such and such program. I would say, should we provide this program that we think we should provide? What idea would they have that would be different than what we would expect? All right, we thought, families want nutrition classes, but they really just want like a monthly shuttle to the shopping mall. And we can say, well, that's not valid. I'm really concerned about their, high blood pressure and diabetes. And yeah, you should be. And you should find a way to kind of meet those needs that you can kind of perceive even. But nothing you think you're accomplishing is happening if you have failed to listen. Nothing you think you're doing is actually happening. And everybody checks themselves too late to notice that. They say, well, why did such and such fail? Because you didn't ask enough questions. Okay.
One, maybe two. So Anne and then Julie. We'll see.
Hello, is anyone here from Enid Pratt?
Yep.
Okay, so I heard librarians from Enid Pratt talking about getting programs out of a room and putting it out on the floor, right? And it changed everything for us because you still need to have your programs and your stats, right? But we took programs out, like once a week we take a program out into the floor. So this week it was Media Matters, and my colleague put up a sign that says media influences your body image, and a few books about that because there's so many books about how media influences us, right? But then there's this question, like, do you think it? And all we do is stand there and the kids come in, we're like, do you think this? What do you think? Like that? I don't even know how I fell into it. But the best part of the program is that it's like if you take the program out of a room and put it out in the midst of the stacks, you just have this opportunity to just stand there and listen to what the conversation is. So it was my idea, but it's a great idea that's enabled us. Just yesterday, I was asking my colleague, do you want to do this next year? He goes, I don't really even care about what programs we do. The most important thing is listening. Literally out of his mouth yesterday, after we've run the program for a whole year. Yeah.
Julie?
Hi, I'm from Queen Anne's County, and I've been running a teen writers program for about 7 years. I have a girl who started with me when she was 12, and next month she turns 18. So technically, she is about to age out of youth services because we talk about youth services going through senior year of high school. The reason she's been with us so long is because writing is the way she expresses herself. There's been a lot of darkness in her life, hospitalizations, and what I would expect are suicide attempts, although I don't know, we don't talk about that. And I just think how limited we can be by the age groups that define our work. And I think what you're saying is that there's developmental stages, and what we're seeing in teens continues into the early 20s. And I think it's a challenge for us to continue to provide those services when we're limited by age group. So is that correct? Are you saying that many of these services would be beneficial into the early 20s?
I am saying that, and I think that you guys there's plenty of research to base an argument about that. I think you're probably going to learn a lot more about that later as we talk about like adolescent neurology and things. But I also think those things would have to shift. The 16-year-old is not going to be reached with the same thing the 24-year-old or vice versa. I also think these ages mean something differently than they were when even I was those ages, which wasn't that long ago. I'm 32. And what I would say is, certain programs in my community, for example, were targeting high school age. So they were saying like 14 through 18. They failed because they were offering like job opportunities and trainings and things, and they really were worried about the lack of employed youth in our community. And then they redefined it as I think 18 to 24, changed everything. So and it also changed like the accessibility and even just culturally the way we view labor and opportunity is different. And that's just like one example, but I think that we should reassess and again like research and listening. So I think that there's tons of actual quantifiable evidence-based work to respond to the developmental stages of adolescence throughout early 20s. And there are a lot of programs that respond to that now. And you can even cite other programs' success. You can borrow someone else's stats if you've achieved any, right? I try to do that all the time. And the governor's office of children are really hard. And I would say start building that argument, even if it's not successful for a while, okay? And then I would also say everyone everywhere is going to deal with some kind of transition. Transitions are, in my context, a lot of my programs don't age out, or a lot of them are coupled with like offering another aged program that's appropriate, like we have something else waiting because they still need something. When somebody is discharged, so to speak, or moving on, or no longer meeting eligibility criteria, it's really what's happening, right? It feels really sterile and like betrayal. And what I would say is that there are ways that these things are successes. And just like when you were watching your favorite series and the last season was kind of weak and the very last episode was especially corny because they kept doing all those weird recaps, I think that you can do that with a success story. Even if it doesn't feel like a success story, you can say, hey, we've accomplished a lot. I've mapped it all out here. That would be a really good exercise with someone. They can take some ownership over what they achieved instead of thinking, this thing I've always leaned on, I'm losing and I'll fall apart. Because that's not true about them. And if we've supported that, that view of people seeing themselves that way, we fail. Be really firm about that. And I feel that way. I've had kids say, you can't leave or sabotage their success in a court-mandated program so they can continue probation because they want case management. I failed. That kid should have felt ready. That was a big part of my job. I think getting people ready when we know they're not going to be ready, we know there's going to be other supports. You have a pretty good assessment after 6 years. I've got a youth that worked with from 12 to 18. He's the only youth I still work with. And I'm getting ready to discharge him. He could move on to adult programs. He wouldn't need it. He's a really self-sustaining, independent kid. And spare a couple real left field questions he asks me occasionally. I'm pretty confident in his ability to succeed. What I would say is if I knew that there was some kind of big deficit, or I was worried about something I knew I wasn't going to be around to help with, but I knew it was inappropriate to keep reaching, I would say, here's these places. And I would do a lot more legwork than just give them a list or a phone number, right? I would connect them to people. I would help him apply to things. I would make sure he has like a level of comprehension that's functional. Just tell him about it and have a checklist in my head that I'm off the hook. That won't be satisfying at night when you see on the news. And I know that too, because I lost kids, multiple kids. Yeah, got real in there, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you.